Good catch, whoever said that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we still have a few people joining, and I know we had about 75 people that registered last time I checked, and we're at about half of that. So I'm just going to give it a couple more minutes. Pretty much every second someone joins, so we'll get started in about 2 minutes.
So hey Chad, I just want to know, somebody asked if they're muted. Yeah, this is a webinar format, so all the attendees can't just talk randomly, but if you have any questions, you can type them in the Q&A and we'll get to them when we can.
Yeah, so in the intro, I'm going to cover how we handle Q&A. But yes, we're not going to have everybody talking at once, or that could become a bit of a gong show. But we do have a place at the bottom there for Q&A, and we will get to those at an appropriate time. Certainly, I think at the end we will have time for all Q&As, but maybe we'll pause at the end of each speech. Having said that, maybe give it about one more minute and we'll get started. And Brianna, are you going to let Nicholas know how it feels to be so cool?
Yeah, I'll just tell them later. It's pretty hot in Temecula, so I don't really understand, the cool part. It's like 90 today, I think.
Oh yeah, I'm also a father of two, so my years of being cool went away quite a while ago.
I'm a mother of two, so I'm right there with
There we
you.
go. Well, we got our own definition of cool, I'm sure. Okay. Well, we haven't had anybody join in the last minute or so, and we've got about 60% of who registered, which is pretty good for events. So thank you all for coming and joining us today. Welcome. My name is Chad Hasten. I work with Series Air on the marketing side, but this is absolutely not about me. I'm just here to introduce you to two boots on the ground users of the Series Air Black Betty. And today we're discussing, or rather directly comparing, spray drones to air blast sprayers and airplane. I am covering for Steve Lee, who I believe is here and would be available to answer some questions should they come up, but is out of town at the moment in a hotel room that has been described as having absolutely atrocious internet service. So rather than have him sketch out and freeze on the screen, he had me come in last minute, which I was happy to do. So once again, welcome to everybody. Again, we're going to talk about different methodologies of spraying and how they compare when it comes to deposition and canopy performance in California orchards. So our speakers are going to share some trial data from almond and pistachio orchard and walk you through some actual data and results. And again, we will cover some coverage analysis, some canopy performance, swath testing methodology. And a question already came up about whether or not there would be an opportunity for Q&A. So a little bit of housekeeping. I want to direct your attention to the bottom of your screen where you should see a button that says Q&A. Please feel free to ask any questions that you have there. I will monitor it as it goes on, as will our speakers. If it's a technical question or something that we can help you in real time, I'll just quickly answer that for you. If it is a question for one of the speakers, we will wait until a natural pause or the end of their individual sessions. I know we're going to do a little bit of a sandwich between Brianna and Emilio, taking turns talking, but we will have some pauses in between for any appropriate questions so we don't have to wait too long. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce you to our first speaker. That is Brianna Layfield. She is the president and founder of AgBee. Brianna has spent the last 7 years working alongside growers, researchers, and industry partners to help bridge the gap between emerging UAV technology and real-world agricultural applications. Her work focuses on evaluating how these systems perform in the field and helping develop practical, science-based approaches for their use specifically in specialty crops. So please join me in welcoming Brianna Layfield, and I turn it over to you, Brianna.
Thank you so much, Chad. So this work was a collaborative effort between Dr. Steve Lee, AgBee, and NC AgSpraying. Today, I'm going to walk through how we designed and executed the field study used to evaluate the Series Air platform in commercial tree nut orchards. So the goal of this presentation, we're not talking about results yet, but we're rather going to explain how we built the study, what variables we tested, and how we collected and processed the data to generate meaningful comparisons. So study objectives, we had 3 primary goals here. First, we wanted to optimize the Series Air system by evaluating 3 different boom configurations and understanding how flight direction and flight height influenced application performance. Second, we wanted to quantify how material moved through the canopy by measuring coverage and deposition at multiple canopy positions. And then finally, we wanted to benchmark the Series Air platform against conventional application methods, specifically air blast and fixed wing aircraft, and identify practical considerations for future commercial adoption. So looking at our study framework, this is kind of a summary of our overall study design. So we started by configuring 3 boom designs. There was the stock modified V boom that Series sends with their current platform. And then we designed 2 experimental booms that we built specifically for this project. And we then evaluated different flight directions, flight heights, measured canopy coverage and deposition, and compared those results against conventional application systems. So the intent was to, isolate variables and determine what configurations produce the most effective and consistent applications. So looking at our field trial study site, which was at Carvalho Ranch, courtesy of Nino and Emilio, in Tranquility, California, commercial almond and pistachio orchards were selected because they present a challenging environment for aerial applications due to canopy density and height. Dr. Steve Lee served as our principal investigator, and then AgBee and NC AgSpraying supported field execution and data collection between April 28th and 29th. We did 2 days. And then the methodology remained constant between crops, and you will see data collected on both almonds and pistachios a little bit later in this webinar. So 3 application systems were evaluated. The Series Air UAV operated at 10 GPA using multiple boom configurations and varying flight parameters. And then the air blast sprayer served as the conventional ground application benchmark at 150 GPA. And then the fixed wing aircraft served as the conventional aerial benchmark, also at 10 GPA, but with a much larger swath width. So including these systems allowed us to compare not only application performance, but also, operational fit within those commercial orchard systems. So to kind of give you an idea, obviously we wanted to focus on these 3 boom designs, that we have for Series. So the Series Air platform is substantially heavier than many of the agricultural UAVs, which creates very strong prop wash effect. So when using the stock modified V boom at higher application volumes, much of that spray can be driven downward beneath the aircraft, which then reduces the effective swath width and creates variability in that application pattern. So to address this, AgBee and NC AgSpraying designed and built two experimental boom configurations, the extended front and extended rear booms, which you can see here, move the nozzles beyond that primary prop wash zone with the goal of increasing the swath width, improving application uniformity, and then reducing that coefficient of variation. So these designs weren't specifically created for orchards, but tree nuts provided an excellent environment to begin evaluating this performance. So you can see here with the extended front, it comes beyond the front of the props. The rear, this is like a side view, so you can see here how it goes beyond the props in the back. And then right here is the V boom. That's stock with the series system. So several parameters were intentionally varied throughout the study. We evaluated the three booms, two flight directions, and then two flight heights. At the same time, several parameters were held constant, including flight speed, spray volume, swath width, droplet size, and tank volume. By controlling these variables, we're able to isolate treatment effects and then make direct comparisons between those configurations. It's also important to note that these parameters apply only to the series air treatments, so the air blast and fixed wing were conducted using their own operational standards, which we'll review prior to the data reveal. So each treatment was conducted with 5-row orchard plots containing 6 designated sample trees. So this is just an example of how those were laid out. 3 PVC poles were installed within each sample tree to capture deposition throughout the canopy. So there was high, middle, and low at each position within the tree, and we did it in the outer canopies and in the center middle of the canopy. So the poles were positioned at a 45-degree interval around the canopy, and this was intentionally done so we didn't have to reposition those poles when comparing parallel and perpendicular flight paths. So regardless, as you can see here on the right, the 45-degree orientation example, regardless of which direction you're flying, you're not going to have some weird configuration depending on your flight direction. So it helped us kind of standardize everything. So both flight directions could be evaluated equally. And then this layout was repeated consistently throughout the study for all application types. So looking at sampling and quality control, 2 sampling methods were used. We used Mylar cards for fluorescent tracer deposition analysis, and these were placed through those upper, middle, and lower canopy positions. Water-sensitive paper was used to evaluate spray coverage, but was only on the center pole of each tree, and then also at the upper, middle, and lower canopy positions. Oftentimes, water-sensitive paper is kind of the standard, which we understand, but we really wanted to see how much AI was getting throughout the canopy. So throughout the study, we maintained strict quality control procedures, including those standardized take volumes, remixing the dye solution between treatments, and then routine pump and flow meter calibrations. So we essentially calibrated every single tank mix with its dye to each application to make sure that it was all consistent. So that consistency was critical to ensuring the integrity of the data. And then after all the field collection, all samples were processed through a standardized workflow at Dr. Lee's lab. Mylar cards were analyzed for that fluorescent tracer deposition, and then water-sensitive paper was analyzed for coverage. The data were then organized by treatment, canopy position, and application system. And then from there, we generated comparison metrics such as coverage, deposition, and application uniformity that allowed us to directly compare the various systems and configurations. So with the study design established, now we can look at the data results and start getting an idea of how all of these application methods performed in a commercial orchard setting. Before we move on, though, has there been any questions regarding the trial parameters?
I don't see any questions up here on the screen. Last chance for anybody at this time.
Perfect. Then Emilio can go over the string data next.
Okay, well, I will quickly introduce Emilio. So Emilio Carvalho leads the aerial division at NC AgSpraying and serves as chief pilot and chief R&D specialist. He flies and maintains the company's 5 drone fleet, including the Series Air C31 Black Betty. In 2026, he represented California aerial application at the Syngenta and the NAAA Leadership Training Program in Washington, D.C. Please join me in welcoming Emilio Carvalho.
All right, can everybody see my screen? Oh, I imagine you guys can. All righty, so we'll first begin with some string testing data. But I wanted to give everybody a little background on how we got to this boom concept in the first place and kind of why we are testing it. So from the past, I've had a few mentors who have helped me all along my way with the journey of aerial applicating. And two in particular, one was a fixed wing pilot, the other one was a helicopter pilot, Huey. And our goal and question was how can we merge traditional aerial application methods into drone technology? So taking the 100 years of experience with planes and helicopters and putting them into this new environment with drones and UAS. So the first thing they told me was you got to make a boom for it. You got to make a boom. But as you guys all know, that can be quite challenging with traditional nozzles versus atomizers and the whole ball of wax. So how do I say, I entertained the idea, and what we were targeting for wasn't necessarily a wider swath in the beginning. It was just evener. We didn't want a big bell curve in the middle. We kind of wanted a flat plane and less streaking with herbicides because a lot of times in California here, 5, 6 months out of the year is mainly herbicides, and we do not want to be streaking up anything. So essentially, I built the first design on XAG platform because that's what I had on hand, and it had a lot less cables to mend and extend to make the boom. So that's initially why I did with the XAG platform. But as we can see here on the right-hand side, um, we have three different versions: version 1, version 2, version 3, and with the series would be ultimately version 4. So there's been quite a bit of legwork going on with it. So next we'll move on to boom placement. So if you guys haven't known, traditional helicopters have the booms mounted on the much forward part of the landing skids. The reasoning behind this is when the droplets exit the boom out of the nozzles is in quote unquote clean air. So it's not disturbed yet by the propeller wash. So the droplets fall underneath the aircraft, and then the weight of the machine and the rotor pushes it into the canopy before it's disturbed and brought up. So in sort of eliminating drift and other unwanted factors. So with the traditional UAS design and the atomizers being placed right under the propellers and motor mounts of the machine, it simply was trapping and disturbing all the droplets from hitting its original target. So if you guys ever notice you get large vortices and a lot of swirls and a lot of fines just hanging in the air, it's because everything is trapped in between. It just can't be placed where it wanted to be. So this leads to big vortices and can be prone to drift in different scenarios. I got a couple videos here. We'll see if they play. So on the left-hand side is the boom mounted underneath the propellers. And you guys can kind of see that you still have some vortices and things getting trapped underneath the drone. So this is, imagine the propellers right underneath in the front line, straight boom across 10 to 11 feet wide with your atomizers placed equally across. So I'll play it one more time. And in the beginning here, you can kind of see the curls right when it starts, the curls, and it kind of maintains that whole aspect along its whole flight path. And then we'll switch over to the right-hand side here, and this is the boom extended a foot beyond the rotors in front. So you can kind of see there's less vortices, only in the beginning when it slows down, but as it maintains its flight pretty low underneath the drone and coming straight down. Play it one more time. So this kind of gives you a rough idea of what it all looks like. And I'll move into some data here. Okay, so this was our goal, and some of our results we found with the boom being extended in front of the propellers, about a foot in front of the propeller. So it sticks out there quite a ways. We were running a 5-gallon swath, 30 miles an hour. We were relatively low, about 9 feet high, to kind of keep everything towards the ground. In the remote, it was programmed to 22 feet, and we had a 230 size micron programmed in the remote. So all the data and testing was done by Carson Core out of with AgriSpray Consulting. He came out from the Midwest and did some testing with us for 2 days. So if we look here on the right-hand side, we did 3 identical passes over the string line. And from what we can tell, the pattern looks quite different than a normal UAS or drone pattern with a high bell curve in the center here. So it's fairly flat and level. And if we go down to the bottom box, we were getting a 34-foot swath at 10% CV at 5 gallons, which is uh, pretty well in my opinion. I haven't seen anything like this before. And so then we'll move on to the next one here. So this is the boom, the first video I played for you guys with the boom farther back, right in line with the propellers. Still in front, but just underneath the propellers. And we can see how it was a little bit evener, but still heavy in the middle. So what this described to me is that all your droplets are still getting trapped by the prop wash and everything that's happening under the drone with the 4 rotors turning in tandem. All the same parameters, same droplets. And we can see our swath declined 9 feet, uh, about 10 feet to get a 10% CV value. And another interesting finding we noticed was on the remote, we have it set for a 230 micron droplet. But after flying and how the boom is positioned in the front and how the air takes it, we're actually making a 330 or a 375 micron droplet. So particularly a lot larger than what it can be appearing on the remote. So this was just a little background I wanted to give everybody on kind of the data behind old testing and why we took this concept and put it into use with this series Black Betty. So here was my series boom I built. After 4 versions, I've learned a lot. So this boom's made out of carbon fiber, has some supports, and Brianna and AgBee made the same boom, just turned 180 degrees facing the rear. And our goal was to examine swath width, pattern distribution, and canopy deposition. The original 4 atomizers were placed equally apart along the boom. It's roughly 12 feet wide, and just cabling to hold the suspension up from it sagging, and hoses running from the pump straight and tees off into each nozzle. All the hoses are cut at an equal length, so there was no problem with one side getting more than the other. I just wanted to mention that. And here's a small video of what it looks like turned on beforehand in the air. So you can kind of see the concept behind it of it being in the front nozzles and everything else. Oh, let me go back here. All right, so here is our data from our string test with this series air. So on the left-hand side is the boom facing the most forwardest part, and on the right-hand side is the rear boom. So if we look to our left, we're doing 5 gallons an acre, and we try to max out our speed. So we were able to get 38 miles an hour with 13 feet high, 25-foot swath, and a 250 micron droplet. So if we can see here that our 3 tests, we had a little bit of a wind. You can see it drifting off to one side. But after a series of 3 tests, it's all equal. But we still have this high curve in the middle. However, it's somewhat more even, but it's still present. The bell curve is still present in the middle. So if we're looking at this, we're getting roughly a 30-foot swath at a 12% CV with that machine. And we fast forward over here to the rear boom. The results actually look quite significantly better. And you can tell it's more even across. Even though we still have the high peak in the center, it's not as steep in the middle, right here with that little point. So it's It's more of a rolling curve. Still heavy in the center, but we were getting a 33 foot swath at 10%. So ultimately, we are gaining some width out of it, but however, we're gaining width out of it, but we still are seeing the bell curves in the center, which is ultimately was part of our testing to see if that would eliminate it, but we did have some findings that will be released at the end on kind of why this is happening. So all this data here was presented at 5 gallons, and we'll move on to the next slide, which is at 10 gallons. So majority of our work here in California is 10 gallons, and it's just a lot of water coming out, and we have to deal with it. So if we look to the left-hand side, it's the forward boom again. Right-hand side is the rearward boom. So we can see still we have a high peak in the middle on both test results. We were running 10 gallons an acre, 25 feet ride, and that limited us to only 19 miles an hour. So we couldn't really max out the efficiency of the machine just because that is what the pump could put out at that given speed and parameter. We were flying 14 feet high, and we had a 250 micron droplet set in the remote, but in reality, we're making a 360. So in the big scheme of things with these rearward and forward booms, it's about a 100 micron difference. So keep in mind that whatever you have set on your remote, plus or minus 100 microns. All right, but if we still look a little deeper in it, we have high peaks in both. And right here, if you look, it's about 10 feet this way and 10 feet this way. So all this right here is the center of the drone where it flew. And we can look on the right-hand side, about 10 feet left or right. So that's where the machine flew. So all our fluid is getting trapped under the drone still with forward and rearward booms. However, AgBee's was still a little bit more even around the curve. It was not as peaked. It was more rolling curve. And we were making a 25-foot swath at 18% CV with the forward boom and about 28-foot swath, my bad, at a 12% CV with the rear boom. So in the big scheme of things, out of the last two tests, the rearward boom looked the best out of them all, but we just can't seem to get the peak out of the middle. I have some more findings towards the end here that we'll release, but is there anything I'm missing? Oh, the one thing I want to mention out. So I want you guys to imagine the boom in the front of the drone. So when the drone's flying and it tilts forward to propel itself, the boom drops down lower towards the canopy. And then the boom on the back, when the drone flies forward, the boom picks up in the air. So the boom heights are different on both machines as they're flying one way or the other. Just wanted you guys to mention that so you guys have that picture in your head. And I'm gonna play this video first before we get into any conclusions. So this was the forward boom at 5 gallons, kind of what it looked like. Still getting some vortices right in here. But however, just from looking at it, the swath looks more even. Kind of can tell it comes underneath. And then as we slow down, it picks back up. We'll play it again one more time. So based on what we've seen and what we saw and how it went in the field that one day, the first day of the try testing, both booms forward or rear need speed in order to obtain what we're looking for. The faster we go, we can get a more evener swath. But however, that's the limiting factors or pump size. So in order to do these 30-foot swaths at 40 miles an hour at a say 5-10 gallons, you need a bigger pump. So that was a drawback to what we have noticed is because when we were going slower at 10 gallons, you could really see the spray vortices folding over the propeller as they were flying, kind of just folding over the propellers and sucking right back down into where the middle of the drone flew. Hence why we're getting higher peaks in all our data. But the biggest thing I noticed which I noticed from when I first built the first couple booms on an XAG versus the series, it's not the it's it's the way the propellers are laid out. So if you guys know on an XAG, you have two propellers on top of each motor, so totaling only eight propellers, making less air movement and less disturbance where the drone is in the middle. With the series being coaxial, we have now 16 sets of propellers, which are bigger propellers. And there's just a lot of air moving right where the drone is. A lot of turning different ways and doing different things. So when you slow down, that air just affects the swath uh, quite horribly, as you can tell. You can really see it with your eye. It just rolled back over the top. The drone was all pink and everything else. So pretty much what I've written down here. Slower speeds, the spray curled over the top. The faster you went, the more it laid down, and the coaxial disturbed more of the droplets and everything else, droplets and the swath. So that was the biggest factor I've noticed from when I've done it in the past to putting a boom on this machine is just how the propellers are laid out, how the machine flies, how it makes its air, is it just disturbed the pattern in a different way. So, and ultimately, what we could do to reuse this setup and make it more efficient, we just need some bigger pumps. We'll be able to go faster and just kind of just scale it up bigger in the future if that's an idea we want to consider. So I believe that is all my portion for uh, the string testing.
Thank you very much, Emilio. Appreciate it. Some great information there. Last time we did have a couple questions pop up just at the very end, so I want to give a little bit of opportunity before Brianna moves on to her next segment. Again, if anybody has any questions regarding what Emilio spoke about, feel free to enter them into the Q&A section now, and then we will move on to Brianna, and you can go on to your next segment. Oh, we do have one. Do you see a difference in your pattern when working with a fully loaded drone compared to a lighter load?
Yes, is the answer to that. There is a difference in the pattern when the drone has more weight.
Can I interject in that a little bit, Brianna?
Yes.
Typically all of our testing is done at with the tank half filled though, where we can have the most average data set collected and all of that. So and all of this data collection, we had the most of the time the tanks were at halfway full.
Yeah, we standardize the tank volume to make sure that the results would all be standardized across, because if you have a different weight in one drone versus the other, it's going to skew the data.
And Joe is asking, what were the nozzle types being used?
Stock nozzles, rotary atomizers. And Colby's asking
Same
what
ones that come with the
deposition.
drone.
Yeah, the ones that come with the drone. And then as far as deposition agents, not in this particular study, we didn't use any, but we have done other studies with deposition agents where we've seen significant difference in canopy penetration by utilizing DRAs and penetrants.
Okay, and I think that proactively answers Colby's question. Have you seen any difference in using deposition agents?
Yes, I answered
Okay.
that.
Yeah, no,
I
I
can
think
share
the
that data with Colby at another time because we did it in citrus and avocado and we had a significant increase. Probably, I think in the lower part of the canopy, it was almost 200% increase in deposition using a DRA, and we used an organosilicone. We used Freeway for that trial, and it was extensively different across all of the trials that we did.
well, Colby just gave you an all caps thank you, so I think that definitely answers the question.
One more thing to mention here before we move on. Looking at what everybody has been saying in the comments, I think someone should define CV value I think somebody hearing it may be different than typing about what CV value is and how it's used in the setting. I think Brianna, you know that better than I do. So if you would like to touch on that.
So yeah, CV is the coefficient of variation. So essentially, what you're looking at is how much variance is occurring over essentially from start to finish of your effective swath width. The lower your variance, the more even your swath. So drones typically have a higher CV because they have that center peak, right? That creates that lack of homogeneous factors within the swath, like it's not as even as it could be. You want it to really kind of be like a plateau, but when it's a really sharp peak, then it increases your CV dramatically. So that's all kind of tied in with your effective swath, your droplet sizing, your volume, all of those types of things kind of then relate to tell you what your coefficient of variation is within your swath. So ground units typically have a very low coefficient of variation, like anywhere between 5 and 10% is average for ground, sometimes even lower, depending on how far they are from the surface of the ground. And then drones tend to be a lot higher. So being able to get the coefficient of variations that Emilio presented just before, with those extended booms, the 9 and 12% and even 18% with the extended front, that's significantly lower than most drone applications as far as coefficient of variation. So creating that evenness of distribution means your product's going out evenly, and then you're getting a successful application because all the product is being put out the way it's supposed to be.
Okay, I believe that covers all of the questions that we have in the Q&A right now. Brianna, if you wanted to move ahead with your next segment.
Alrighty. Cool. All right, so now we're moving on to almond orchard application results. This study focused on understanding how boom configuration, flight orientation, and application system influence deposition and coverage within a commercial almond orchard. So we're going to look at performance within the UAV platform itself before we compare series air to other application systems, but we just wanted to do kind of a summary video here of our super fun field day. So this evaluation was designed around three primary questions. First, how does this boom configuration influence application performance? Specifically, we want to understand whether nozzle placement relative to the aircraft affects deposition and coverage within that canopy. Second, does flight orientation influence deposition? So we looked at parallel and perpendicular flight paths to evaluate aerial application because canopy architecture can affect how those droplets move throughout the tree. And then finally, how does series air compare to established application systems? So this is the broader question that many growers are interested in, and we'll conclude with that comparison. So before reviewing the results, I want to look at these treatments that we evaluated. One thing I want to note is that when we're doing the fluorescent dye for the depositions, we use 30 grams of dye per acre, regardless of application method. So they were all standardized over that. The study included conventional air blast and fixed wing aerial applications, as well as the three UAV boom configurations, which were modified V, extended front, and extended rear. All of these UAV applications were conducted at 10 gallons per acre with a target droplet size of 150 microns and a 22-foot swath width. So the extended rear configuration was also evaluated for that perpendicular flight condition to assess the influence of flight orientation. And then separate orchard blocks were utilized for UAV versus conventional treatments to minimize potential cross-contamination between those systems. So just like a quick review of the boom configurations, modified V is that stock configuration. Extended front is beyond the propeller wash at the front of the aircraft. That was designed by NC AgSpraying. And then that extended rear, developed by AgBee, relocates nozzles behind the aircraft to look at an alternative nozzle placement strategy. And then it wasn't that we were trying to identify a superior design, but rather just understand how that nozzle placement was influencing the deposition and coverage within the canopy. So first metric is product concentration, which we measured using the fluorescent dye deposition on Mylar cards. And this metric helps quantify how much product actually reached that target. So across all three boom configurations, which you can see here, the modified V, the extended front, and the extended rear, the highest deposition values were consistently observed in the upper canopy, followed by the middle and lower canopy positions. And while all three configurations produced measurable deposition throughout the canopy, differences were observed in how the product was distributed. So in the upper canopy, the modified V boom saw about 35% higher deposition than both of the extended booms. And then the largest differences that we saw were in the middle canopy. So that modified V boom had 115% more product deposition than the extended front boom, and then 69% more product deposition than the extended rear boom. The extended rear boom also had 27% more coverage deposition or product deposition than the extended front boom. So in the lower canopy, that modified V boom had a 93% more than the extended front and 60% more than the extended rear. So what these results suggest is that boom configuration influenced that product concentration and distribution pattern throughout the canopy, particularly within those middle and lower canopy regions is where we saw the biggest amount of variance. So Mylar cards obviously quantify how much product reached the target, but water sensitive paper helps evaluate how that product was distributed across the target surface. So the graph on the left shows percent spray coverage on the water sensitive paper, and then the graph on the right shows droplet density or number of droplet impacts recorded on that paper. So looking first at the percent coverage, differences among boom configurations were generally smaller than what we observed for concentration. Some of the larger differences occurred in the lower canopy, where coverage values varied among those configurations. The extended front boom actually had the best coverage at the top of the canopy, while the extended rear boom had the best coverage at the middle and lower canopies. So something to kind of take note of. And then if you look at droplet density, it tells a slightly different story. So the middle canopy demonstrated some of the greatest separation among those boom configurations. The extended rear boom had 88% more droplet density than the modified V and 74% more than the extended front in that middle canopy. And then both extended booms had higher numbers of droplet counts than the modified V boom. So one important takeaway from this data is that different metrics reveal different aspects of this application and how it performed. So a boom configuration that produces higher deposition may not necessarily produce the highest coverage or droplet density. And this is why multiple evaluation metrics are super important when assessing application quality. Then we looked at the final single UAV application. We looked at flight orientation using just the extended rear boom. So parallel and perpendicular flight paths are commonly evaluated in aerial application studies. We do it all the time because we want to understand how flight direction affects and canopy architecture affects the deposition patterns and product movement throughout the canopy. So looking first at concentration, differences were relatively small in the upper canopy here, but became more apparent in those middle and lower canopies. So the middle canopy differed by 80% and the lower by about 93%. And those coverage results showed higher average values under the parallel flight conditions, particularly in this lower canopy. So we saw parallel have a lot better concentration deposition. And then this looking at actual spray coverage, the extended rear perpendicular did have some higher rates here, especially on the lower canopy, but it also had extremely high error bars. So there's a great amount of variability. So it's important to note that perpendicular treatment, we would have to be cautious about concluding that either one of those flight directions was universally superior. We would have to do additional trials and get more data sets to really hone in on which one is better, perpendicular or parallel. But based on this, looking at concentration and coverage, they're fairly close. So there's not necessarily a massive difference between the two. So it just suggests that, flight orientation should be an important consideration for you. And then here's the main one here is how does series air compare, right? So this is what everybody really wants to know. How did the drone compare to the fixed wing and the air blast sprayers? So what I did for these drone values was I actually averaged all three booms because it just gave a little bit more stable representation of the drone as a whole. So averaging all three booms because some were better than others in certain metrics just kind of created a more even distribution for the drone itself. So the perpendicular flight treatment was excluded because flight orientation was evaluated separately. So we just did the parallel flights. All three booms were averaged together for me to get these drone values. So looking at product concentration, which is the graph here on the left, the UAV treatments produce the highest deposition values across all canopy levels, followed by fixed wing and then air blast treatments, which we would expect, obviously, because the fixed wing and the drone are applying at 10 GPA, which is far more concentrated. And then the air blast was at 150 GPA. When we look at spray coverage, though, obviously that different pattern emerges. So the air blast treatment produced the highest coverage values as expected, while the UAV produced intermediate coverage values, and then the fixed wing treatment produced the lowest coverage values. So this highlights one of the most important findings to me of this study is that application performance can't be adequately described using a single metric, that high deposition doesn't necessarily translate to high coverage and vice versa. So it's really important to understand the mode of action with your applied products to thoroughly evaluate what type of application method would be best suited to each individual application. Overall, Series Air demonstrated strong deposition performance while offering a flexible additional aerial application approach for almond orchards based on the data we collected in this study. So key takeaways, to summarize, this study was not designed to identify single optimal booms or universally superior application systems, but really to better understand how UAV application parameters influence deposition and coverage within these almond orchards. So first, boom configuration influence product distribution patterns throughout the canopy, but really no single configuration consistently outperformed the others across every metric. It was kind of a split. And then second, different metrics revealed different aspects of that application performance. So Mylar card showed how much product reached the target, and then water sensitive paper looked at how product was distributed across all those surfaces. Third, flight orientation remains an important consideration in aerial application studies. This particular one kind of had a high degree of variability, which then suggests that environmental and operational factors could also play a significant role. And then fourth, application performance should be evaluated using multiple metrics, deposition, coverage, droplet distribution. They're all giving you a different piece of the puzzle and a different view of that picture to see, how your tool is applying. So they really need to be interpreted together. And then finally, Series Air demonstrated strong performance alongside established application systems. So it's really giving growers, an additional tool in their aerial toolbox for almond orchard management. So thanks so much. Feel free to reach out with any questions if you don't think of them now.
Thank you very much, Brianna and Emilio. Yeah, we'll get to some follow-up opportunities here in a second. First, we do have a couple questions in the Q&A. The first one is a two-parter. What is the age of C31's almond block, and what varieties does it consist of?
That is
I'll
going to be an
I'll
Emilio
answer these
question.
both questions for Nick. This block here is about 12, 13 years old. The trees are about 20 to 25 feet high. They range in that layer, just depending on what part of the field you're in, what kind of soil spot you have. They kind of vary. But this variety, this block in particular had nonpareil Monterey wood colony. So 50% of the field's nonpareil, 25-25 is Monterey Wood Colony, and then the drone flew over directly over the top of the tree. So we lined it up, RTK right over the top, did its passes. Each run was roughly 500 feet long, so we took up half of a quarter mile field. So we ensured once we hit the trees containing the Mylar cards and the water sensitive paper that we were at full speed and the drone was at full speed and putting the correct flow out. But the last thing I wanted to mention with the series Black Betty and how Brianna described it in her presentation is the weight of the machine. So in this trial here, we only put 20 gallons, 20 gallons in it, half the tank load. But once you fill that machine up all the way to the top, and with the weight of the machine itself, it's nearly pushing 600 pounds. So there's a lot of weight behind it, which what I've noticed, it makes a lot of air, a lot of prop wash into the canopy. And flying parallel with the tree rows, the crown of the tree, all your air goes straight in, rolls out, and it's almost in a sense like an inverted aerofan. Aerofan blows up, you can make that drone slow down and blow down. So you're just coming from the top down.
Good point.
Thank you. There is one more question that came up here. What about the weather conditions? How is the temperature, humidity, and delta T?
It wasn't hot, I'll tell you that. It was in the mid 80s, about 85, I'd imagine. Um, I really don't know what the humidity was that day or the delta T. All I know is my weather condition, and it was slightly had a little breeze. But where we were at standing on the ground, we were trapped all around with almonds. You can't really get a breeze in there, but on the upper canopy, it was about 6 miles an hour.
And I think Steve Lee might be typing a more detailed answer, but that is wonderful. Give a couple more seconds here if anybody else. Oh, we do. Nicholas, you do not have to apologize for these questions. They're appreciated. Any plans to test the C31 in orchards at 15 or 20 GPA rates? He notes that's a fairly common aerial rate for almonds.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. At the next opportunity when we can hopefully get the speed and the high volume pump output that we're already in process of working with Ceres on. So they're going to have essentially a specialty crop higher volume pump system for this type of application, which will then allow us to go much faster speed, and then we can reevaluate how these booms are operating within that framework. That would need to happen first, I think, before we then start ramping it up to the other gallonages, but it'll be fairly soon.
And the
And
cards were placed in the nonpareil variety for Andrew.
sorry, say that again.
All the cards were placed in the nonpareil variety, so every other row, nonpareil.
They're all nonpareil.
Okay, yeah, the question was which tree variety did they place the cards? So thank you for that. Do either of you want to speak to the difference between the Black Betty C31 versus the stacked?
It's the same drone. It's just that now they have the approval for the 40-gallon payload, but the drone is the same. We're just working on fine-tuning parameters and stuff like that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brianna.
Yes,
I
sir.
believe that covers all the questions that we got live. To Brianna's point, everyone here is obviously invested in answering any of the questions you have. We know that sometimes they don't pop to the top of your head right when you're listening for the first time, and there's certainly a lot of awesome stuff covered here. Might be tough to digest all at once. To that point, this has been recorded, and we are going to share this with both Brianna and Emilio, as well as on the Series Air Facebook page over the next day or so. We do want to summarize it and get some key points up there for you. So thank you very much on behalf of Series Air for everyone that participated. Again, please do follow both AgBee,
Hold
Series
on,
Air.
wait.
Oh, is there more?
Yeah, Emilio's got to present all the pistachio data still.
My apologize, Emilio. I thought we were doing a sandwich. We're doing a double decker. My bad. Please go on. You're muted.
All right,
There we
everybody
go.
can hear me now? Yes. The first thing I want to point out versus the almond trial and the pistachio trials is how the tree is shaped. So pistachios is more, the best way to describe it is like a globe with like a tree trunk. And the globe starts about 4 to 6 feet off the ground. Because you can kind of see in the picture I put here how they're all perfectly kind of shaped. Almonds like to hang and droop and go down. So your foliage starts a lot lower to the ground. That's the first thing I want to point out is just the structure of the tree compared to an almond and the leaf structure. Pistachios have a bigger leaf. It's called almost about the palm of your hand, I would say. Almonds are real thin slivers. Um, and then it's almost if you've seen like a cottonwood tree before, they have like the round silver dollar leaves. Just imagine that, but fairly a little bit size bigger. Uh, so we're going to go over some data similar to what Brianna presented in the almond test. We ran a series of tests in pistachios the following day, comparing the aerofan, airplane, and the drone. This orchard in particular was planted in 2004. The trees are roughly 20 foot tall, and the canopy was real dense, and they did hedge every other center. So one center was hedged, the next center was normal, hedged again, and so on throughout the orchard. All right, let's move on here to the next slide. Okay, we're going to start with the aerofan, right? We're just going to work our way into it. So with the pistachio tree, the foliage is starting about 6 feet off the ground and 4 to 6 feet off the ground. And an almond, it's about 4 feet. So the foliage is a lot higher in the tree. We did 2.5 miles an hour with the aerofan at 150 gallons an acre. And we can kind of see here if we look on our fluorescent dye deposition on the Mylars, the weights we recorded, blue being high, medium, orange, green, low. We had the most amount of dye in the lower part of the canopy, and then it just stair stepped its way down as we got to the top. The one thing I wanted to point it out is on the upper canopy of a pistachio tree. So when you're hitting that 15, 16, 18 foot range right on the top. That canopy gets the most amount of sun. So there's a lot more leaves, foliage. And when that aerofan came through, the air could not get dispersed through the leaves itself. The leaves acted like as a block. So just imagine as the air is getting blown up, even though you see a lot of fines and everything making it through the top, the core of your spray, it just can't penetrate through. So this is kind of how we can tell this by our first blue box here being such a low amount of dye collected in the upper canopy. Um, the product is essentially 15 times diluted compared to the plane and drone that we tested. And there was a lot of runoff. So in the drone, when the aerofan drove by, all the spray just went all over the leaves, and then we had a lot of excessive runoff. So as we can see here in the bottom left photo, the leaves were essentially dripping pink. So they were just covered with spray. And as we got up the tree, it just worked its way down. All righty, we're gonna move on here to the plane. So the airplane came along, did the same parameters as a drone, just however his physical parameters were a little bit different. He was roughly 140 miles an hour, 60, 65-foot swath. I will show our percent coverage and our hits in a second here. But on the paper itself, we had a low percent of coverage on the water sensitive paper and a lot of low, how do I say, hits on the water sensitive paper, just in general about how many droplets there were. That is in correlation because if you have not a lot of droplets, you're not going to have a lot of percent coverage. So they kind of go hand in hand. But we found out with the smaller amount of droplets, however, they're carrying a much lethal dose. They're 15 more times as potent, and they penetrated the upper canopy better just because you're coming from the top down. So now we can break it down a little further and look here in trial 2. So we see the upper canopy was the best, and then as we stair step down to the middle and then the lowest part of the canopy, we found less and less deposition. But however, the deposition is still about par with what the aerofan did in the middle and about or in the lower part of the tree with the aerofan. Aerofan just excelled slightly more in the lower half. but as a whole, it was particularly greater than the Aerofan's findings. But I want to point out to a lot of people here, you may think the middle canopy and the lower canopy is important. You want a lot of equal coverage there as well. But majority of your fruiting and nuts and disease pressure starts from the top of the tree and works its way down. These trees in particular, they look real bushy, but you walk out to them, the middle crown is practically just bare wood because all the sunlight shades it out, so there's no leaves growing. So it's particularly, we just want to put an emphasis on your first blue bar about how you're getting your spray into the upper canopy because that's where majority of your pest pressure and disease starts, and that's where your nuts are, and that's our bread and butter. So we want to protect those. So lastly, we'll move on to the drone here. Okay, the drone has a little bit more information here to break down. But however, it's all kind of the same concept as what we were been going over beforehand. So I just want to start with some basic parameters. 10 gallons an acre, 25 miles an hour we were able to fly at because these row spacings were 19 feet. In the almonds, we had to fly particularly slower, about 21 miles an hour, just due because of the row spacing being 22 feet wide. We ran the drone without terrain falling, so we had a fixed height of 30 feet, so plus or minus 10, 11 feet above the canopy itself, the drone was flying. We had a 150 micron droplet, and in this aspect, we were using the standard V-boom that comes with the drone itself. We decided not to test the other different booms based on what we saw the previous day, and plus we were timing, we only had enough time to test the one as well. So I'm just going to go a step further here. Trial 3 versus trial 4. So the data is very similar level wise, and our error margins are, however, fairly similar as well. Error margin being the black line above the bars themselves. So trial 3 was parallel, and trial 4 was perpendicular to the rows. So we flew the first trial with the rows, and then the second trial against the rows, all the same settings. The next slide will show our percent coverage, but it ranged in between the aerofan and the plane. So it's kind of the happy medium between both of them. The percent coverage, the aerofan had the best due to more water volume. The plane had the lowest, and the drone was somewhere in between all three types. We found that the V-boom excelled over all boom types for this specific application based on what we saw the previous day in the almonds. Flying parallel to perpendicular kind of showed no difference. But in my opinion, I still like to fly with the rows. And the spray is 15 times as potent compared to an aerofan. So I'm going to go to the next slide here. So here breaks down our percent coverage and our hits on our water sensitive paper. So all right, we'll start with the left-hand side. The left-hand side is percent coverage. So we can see here in the lower part of the canopy, which is the green line, the aerofan excelled really well. And I wanted to mention too as well, since the pistachio tree foliage starts a little bit higher, when the aerofan drives by, the nozzles are kind of more in tune to blowing up instead of down for the other foliage. Kind of sometimes an almond has that effect. And the percent coverage on the water sensitive paper in the middle of the tree and the upper canopy of the tree were fairly similar. Moving on to the airplane on trial 2 here. As we can see, there was not a lot of coverage on our water sensitive paper. That is just because we were doing 10 gallons of water. Plop on over to trial 3, had the best for all aerial application methods based on percent coverage on water sensitive paper. And then moving on to perpendicular, which is being at slightly lower in the low part and the medium and the high. And the other thing I want to mention too is we only put water sensitive paper in the middle of the trees. So around all edges, it had Mylar cards. And then in the center crown of the tree, where the tree is directly underneath the trunk or in line with the trunk, had water sensitive paper plopped low, medium, high. And every trial had this, and it had this that the day before in the almonds as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the hits on the water sensitive paper correlates to our percent coverage. And we can see we had a lot of hits with the Aerofan. A lot of hits, 7,000, 3,000, about 2,000 hits on the low, high, medium, and low. This is all induced because it's 150 gallons of water. A lot of water makes a lot of droplets, but each droplet's real not as potent. So that's that. So moving on to the next one with the plane. The water sense paper did not have a lot of droplets. The drone on trial 3 had fairly more, about in par, about actually a little bit more droplets in the upper canopy than the Aerofin got at 150 gallons. Um, and then flying perpendicular with the Rose 2 was fairly similar between trial 3 and 4 in the higher aspect, but still a little bit lower. All right, moving on to my conclusions. Our conclusions, what we decided. All aerial application methods, whether it be an airplane, fixed wing, or the drone, still excelled over the Aerofans at 150 GPA. The drone excelled over the plane, fixed wing, and the Aerofan. This is all in part to do because the canopy distribution by the prop wash allowed the droplets to enter the upper canopy where more fruit and disease pressure exists. Kind of going back and forth to what I said in the last segment of the drone, and since being an inverted aerofan, because you can kind of set it to what you want to do and blow the air straight down. It's kind of like an inverted aerofan. Flying parallel to the rows allowed the prop wash disruption to enter the crown of the tree. And if you've noticed driving around, your inner canopy crown of the tree is usually empty because that allows more sunlight to come in. So the crown of the tree is empty and all your branches and fruit are around, kind of hanging over. So that middle section's empty. So if you can target that where it's empty, you can get your spray in and let the drone do the rest. The high GPA still didn't get all the way up to the top of the upper canopy in the pistachios. This is just to do because of the dense leaf structure. The leaves practically did not move with the aerofan. With it just did not have enough air disbursement to get the leaves to move around. And the percent coverage on the water sensitive paper can be deceiving at high GPAs. The Mylar cards with the weight amount of the fluorescent dye showed true results for the AI. So this is just kind of what I have here about our pistachio trials. If you guys have any questions, we're all ears.
So we do have one question that squeaked in just at the end of Brianna's last segment. Have either of you done sprays with translaminar pesticides? And if so, how effective was it?
Yes, we have, and it's extremely effective, obviously, because you're getting that higher concentration of AI, and then it can go to the rest of the plant as needed. Some of them that we do are contact and systemic, kind of a combination effect, and those also work extremely well. The nutrient applications that we've seen with the translaminar effect, is pretty significant with a drone. So looking at lower volume drone applications, we've seen, as a rule, a higher uptake of nutrients and product with that higher concentration of AI compared to traditional methods. So it's been really good.
And what is the horsepower of the Aerofan?
So this unit itself is not engine driven, it's PTO driven. So the tractor behind it was a 125 horse, just John Deere ML Orchard Series tractor.
Give just another minute or two if anybody has any questions. Oh, maybe it was mentioned, but what ground speed was the Aerofan application at?
Both applications were made at 2.5 miles an hour.
Thank you, Emilio. We'll see if any else trickle in before I attempt my summary of thanks again, anything else that either of you have to contribute today? My apologies.
Now the summary is on point.
Okay, good. Wow, that's my cue. All right. Just making sure that nobody else trickles in here. Oh, what is the ETA on the upgraded pump?
That is a series question.
It is.
We've,
I don't have
we've
the
been
answer to that.
told,
He's coming to the
yeah,
rescue.
Steve's coming in on that. I know they're working on it, so it should still be this year, hopefully within the next couple months.
Okay, I think he's answering that off. Oh, did he get to it?
Yeah, he said this fall. So yeah, we're
There's
hoping within the next couple months. It's being tested, is what we're told.
So to that end, and oh wait, is there another one here that just trickled in? No. So thank you all for your questions, and a special thank you to Brianna and Emilio for taking the time today. Again, on behalf of Series Air, we are our interest is transparency and in sharing the data. Obviously, here to answer any questions, not just during these webinars, although we do plan to have more of these in the future where we bring actual users and their experience to the table for you to evaluate. For this one specifically, again, as I tried to say earlier, if you didn't have the opportunity to ask a question that pops up, or if you didn't have the opportunity to dive deep into some of this data or the charts that were shared on the screen, maybe you were watching on your phone and you couldn't quite see the font size, we do aim to post the full recording of this. We will also share it with AgBee and with NC AgSpray so they can share their own presentations as well as this video on their socials. Again, our interest is in having you follow all of the above and so that we can continue to share things, updates on Series Air and updates on the application and the trials as they occur. But for now, thank you very much for your participation. We're going to let everybody get to their dinners and evenings. And we do once again welcome you to check out Series Air's Facebook over the next day or two. We will be providing a summary as well as the recording for download for each of you. With that, I wish you each a good night. And thank you once again to Brianna and Emilio for your time.
Night, everybody.
Have a great night, everybody.